Okay, hey guys, Paul here. So today I wanted to talk about a defense of sorts of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that this will be an interesting discussion, and it'll certainly probably get some fiery responses in the comments, so it'll be fun. Um, Obviously, you guys probably can tell just by like many of my discussions, I'm not like the world's biggest fan of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of just what the game has become, how the game is played now. And this is not a particularly uncommon opinion, depending on like where you frequent online. Lots of people don't like modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And they sort of feel like it's too fast, it's too crazy, the power creep has gone out of control. You know, it's just full of OTKs, it's full of, Omni-Negate boards, turns take forever. The typical arguments that will get you called a Yu-Gi boomer. And, I can certainly relate to some of those arguments. I don't like a lot of the aspects of, like modern Yu-Gi-Oh! They're not all my favorites. But I wanted to present sort of a defense of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And some of the aspects of the game that I think have actually evolved and become pretty interesting and that I think it does really well that kind of make Yu-Gi-Oh! Still feel unique and still feel fun. So this is kind of stream of consciousness. I don't actually have any notes to go on here, so I'm just going to be talking, and you guys let me know in the comments what you think. So the first thing is that I feel when people kind of complain that like the game doesn't feel interactive, it feels like it's solitaire, and that they sort of miss the long, drawn-out games of old. I get it, but I actually would say that one thing Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Has done well is that it's kind of still managed to have the same amount of interactions that a normal game might have had like years ago, but they're just crunched into one turn. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically, combos are really long, obviously, but because of hand traps, you are actually oftentimes able to play in your opponent's turn. And if you have multiple hand traps in your deck, like, say you have an Imperm and an Ash Blossom and an Abiru in your hand or something like that, then you are actually able to engage with your opponent multiple times within the same turn. So this really matters a bit because it means like while your opponent is trying to like play around, your hand traps, that becomes a point of interaction. It's not just solitaire. They're doing combos, you're interacting with the combos, like stopping the combos, and they're forced to either reroute the combos and like, change something like, oh, okay, my card got Ash, what can I do now? And in addition to that, they even have counterplay to the hand traps in terms of cards like Called by the Grave or Crossout Designator, or even certain other like kind of niche hand trap stopper cards. There's a few, technically Cyframe Gamma, while being a hand trap, can stop other hand traps. So that's sort of a fun thing. Now, I know what people are gonna say. Well, like if you don't draw hand traps, then you're used, like you can't do anything. You're sort of just helpless, and your opponent gets to play. And that's true. That does happen. But if you think about it, that could always happen in Yu-Gi-Oh. You could always technically break and not have a monster to do anything with. I guess yeah, you'll die faster these days, but I think that is still something that people don't give modern Yu-Gi-Oh enough credit for. It's the fact that like there are interactions happening, and there are decisions being made, and it's just like a matter of them happening in a fewer amount of turns. That even extends to when a person goes second and they have to like break a board. So when you're doing board breaking, particularly with certain cards like Forbidden Droplets, Dark Ruler No More, and things like that, there are still interactions going on there. It's important to run those cards because they allow you to sort of sometimes play at all, but they aren't just completely free. Yes, Dark Ruler No More prevents your opponent from responding to it with monster effects, but they can actually respond to Dark Ruler No More with spell and trap effects. So if they were to chain a spell or trap, then that can actually negate it or just allow them to then chain their monster effects to the spell and trap that they just used. So there is a little bit of interaction there, same with Forbidden Droplets. With Forbidden Droplets, like, you have to sort of choose what you send away to negate your opponent's monster stuff, and like that determines whether or not they can respond. There's a little bit of interaction going on there, and even when you're just using cards that are sort of meant to be bait, like let's say Dino Wrestler Pagratops, or Raigeki or Lightning Storm or something like that, the opponent does have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to negate those cards. Negates, especially today, have actually become a little bit less frequent. There aren't as many just straight up free negation cards. You do have things like, Baron de Fleur, which is an Omni Negate, and maybe something like Borreload Savage shows up sometimes. But other negation monsters these days, or disruptions, aren't actually Omni Negates. So like take Apollosa for example. It can negate monster effects, but it can really do nothing at all about getting hit with like mind control, getting, just like hit with Raigeki. It can't really stop those things. So the whole going first and going second mechanic, there's a dynamic going on there that I think isn't entirely talked about enough. It's just the fact that like, yes, it feels like the game is sort of being rushed, But in those early turns, the few turns that maybe we get, there is a little bit of interaction going on there, and sometimes quite a lot of interaction. Even with the hand trap example I was just saying, choosing the order that you use hand traps or just the things that you decide to use hand traps on is a very big deal. And if you have cards like Nibiru, then the mind game of whether or not you even have it is something that's really fun and kind of feels akin to that old threat of like Torrential Tribute or Mirror Force or even like Gore's the Emissary of Darkness. For those of you guys who remember cards like that, it kind of feels relevant. So that's something that's really fun. And then I would say that one of the more abstract things that I kind of like about modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It can be hit or miss, I know, there's examples of it being done badly, but it's the fact that more decks in general are able to extend like longer and like play more. And that doesn't just apply to top tier decks. A lot of like your low tier decks, back in let's say 2010, some low tier decks just sucked. They were bricky, they couldn't do a lot, and when they did manage to do anything, it just wasn't enough. These days though, even if like you pick up a random tier 3, tier 4 deck, if you type it in on Google or on YouTube or whatever, you will still find a list of like combos that these decks can do. Whether it's through the use of extenders, whether it's the fact that like a lot of link monsters and things are generic, it means that more decks can take advantage of more things than they used to be able to. So whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess it depends. But I like the fact that, say, a Blue Eyes White Dragon deck can do a lot more now than a Blue Eyes White Dragon deck could do 10 years ago. And even if you're playing something that seems like it's supposed to be trash, like Appliancers or whatever, there are actually like still combo lines that these decks have. Blackwings, I remember when the Blackwing stuff got announced for that upcoming set, Darkwing Blast I think it's called, there was like a post on Reddit that I saw and it was like, here's this like 30-step Blackwing combo that can end on like these many negates and these many crazy things. And like it was just interesting to see that even though Blackwings probably aren't going to be like the world's best deck, the fact that they can do a lot of stuff still means that like they're a threat. And it's like I feel like the gap there has actually closed a little bit. Even though top tier decks are strong, sometimes low tier decks, especially if they're unimpeded by like any hand traps, can really go off, and that's something that I don't know existed so much, a decade ago or longer in Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's just sort of something interesting to think about. I don't feel, again, gets talked about enough when people are just in the middle of their accusations of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And I would say that my last thing, and this is just sort of more general, I think that the game has more like dynamic play now. Like it feels more fast and it feels more unpredictable. So I know that's not everybody's cup of tea and that kind of just sounds like it could just be bullshit. I get it. But what I mean is like, setting a monster and like passing turn was what you might do in 2008. I don't know, that might be like a starter play. These days though, every deck feels strong and like your plays feel meaningful. It feels like any card that you draw can like do something for you immediately. So while it is less a game of, like chess, it can still be fun to kind of play that super fast game. It almost makes you think of like the hand trap analogy kind of reminds me a little bit of like poker. And sometimes just the fact that like one card can do a whole lot means that you have to look at the game a little bit differently. Back in the day, like when I played Yu-Gi-Oh, I was a very conservative player. I'd always kind of hold back my cards a little bit. I wouldn't set everything. I wouldn't always take the bait and use Torrential Tribute on like a single monster or two monsters being on the field. I'd maybe try to wait until that third monster showed up, try to bait my opponent and stuff like that. And those are definitely aspects of the game that I miss. But today, it's a little bit different because you're kind of more rewarded for like keeping your foot on the gas. I get it, people don't always like that, but I think that it does make Yu-Gi-Oh feel like a distinctly unique game, and it also separates it even more from other like kind of popular card games like right now, like Pokemon, Digimon, Magic. They're slower paced, and Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of faster paced, but I think that there is a certain freedom of expression that comes with that. So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts on modern Yu-Gi-Oh that are a little bit more positive. I know like people get upset when I'm just making videos saying like, oh, I hate this, I hate that. Well, you're just a Yu-Gi boomer and you just hate the game. So I think that these are some very valid things that modern Yu-Gi-Oh, sort of Master Duel, I guess, bring to the table, and they're just worth thinking about. But I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. Are there some other redeeming qualities of today's Yu-Gi-Oh, the fast Yu-Gi-Oh, the long turns, the combos, the extenders, the negates, whatever it is, that you actually feel kind of go, they're like thankless, they go unspoken for? Let me know down in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.